नमस्कार एंड वेलकम टू RCI नवशिखर चैनल। RCI के नवशिखर चैनल में हमारे सभी दर्शकों का स्वागत है। आज के हमारे प्रोग्राम का टॉपिक है सपोर्टिंग फैमिलीज ऑफ चिल्ड्रन विद ASD एंड टुडे वी हैव विद अस इन आवर स्टूडियो मिसेस इंद्रानी बासु। शी इज वर्किंग विद एक्शन फॉर ऑटिज्म एज अ प्रोग्राम कोऑर्डिनेटर and Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya. She is working with IGNU as Assistant Director, Regional Services Division, and she has done a research on families of children with ASD, and she herself is a mother of a young boy with autism. Welcome to RCI Navshikhar channel, ma'am. Progressing further, I would like to inform our viewers that they can call us for their any queries. हमारा टोल फ्री नंबर है 1800112008। हमारा स्टूडियो नंबर है 26511613 और हमारा फैक्स नंबर है 26511609। Today we will discuss about supporting families of children with ASD. What is ASD? It is Autism Spectrum Disorder. So progressing further with our topic, let's ask Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya, what do we mean by autism?
Well, autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental disorder which is marked by impaired language, communication and social skills. Children with autism often display odd behaviors and have sensory difficulties. Symptoms usually present by the 3rd year of life. We find that other developmental milestones are usually normative. And what is important to remember that it is a spectrum disorder. In other words, it ranges in variability or intensity. The variability of symptoms differs from individual to individual. Let me elaborate these points a little bit. Autism as a disorder was really first identified in the 40s and 50s in the United States, and subsequently it has come to be accepted as a neurodevelopmental disorder. And the interesting thing about autism is that its symptoms manifest when a child is going through the phase of social and language development. That is usually in the 2nd year onwards. And that is why it's very difficult for a very small child to be diagnosed with autism, because you find that the other developmental milestones, the motor milestones, physical milestones, usually tend to be as per norms, unless of course autism is accompanied by any other developmental disorder like cerebral palsy or mental retardation and so on. So for a very young child to realize that there is something not quite, normative or not quite normal, this realization really starts dawning when speech and other kinds of social behavior don't develop in the way that they do with regular children. And we have with here a parent, Indrani Basu. I'm also a parent, but she's come here especially as a parent, and I'd invite her to share her experiences about her own child at this stage.
So I have a 17-year-old with autism, and as Shubhangi says, when Nano, that's my son, he was young, we really didn't think there was anything wrong with him, because he walked at the right age, he turned at the right age, all his motor milestones were normal, and in fact we thought he was a very bright kid because he did a lot of things earlier. He started even what is a precursor for speech, as in babbling. He babbled at the time that most children do. In fact, he also had certain words. It's just that his words didn't really go up the way it does in a neurotypical child. It plateaued. But when I look back now, there were a lot of signs of autism. Had I known of autism, maybe he would have got diagnosed earlier. But we started worrying only when he was 2.5, as you said.
Let's take a look at the incidence of autism, shall we? I'll demonstrate the next slide. According to current estimates in the USA, 1 out of every 150 persons is diagnosed with autism, or rather is likely to be affected with autism. Recently, a study in Cambridge in the United Kingdom, conducted by one of the leading researchers in autism, Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, it was a very alarming study which indicated that as high a figure as 1 out of every 64 may be affected with autism. And if we use these figures at India's current population, we may say that 2 to 4 million individuals are likely to be affected. And the majority of those affected have no access whatsoever to either medical or educational facilities.
As you said that autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So can we say it's a progressive or a non-progressive nature? What's the nature of autism?
Would you like to?
Well, all children with autism progress. Given the right kind of training, given the right kind of intervention. You see, children with autism, in the first slide we said that they have a difficulty in communication, in social skills, and in thought and behavior, and they also have a very different way of perceiving the world, and thereby their learning styles are very different. So when I talked about the right kind of intervention, we have to keep in mind that they learn differently, they may learn differently, though as they learn to learn, they may start learning more like typical people do, but initially we have to use certain kinds of special intervention techniques to help them learn. But given that, all children with autism will progress.
Can I just add to this point? I think probably what you were trying to indicate is, does it have a cure? Is it something that will go away with time? Now, at this stage, it's very important to note that autism is something that cannot be cured. However, by putting in appropriate behavioral measures, the difficulties that people with autism face can be mitigated to a great extent. मतलब काफी हद तक सुधार आ सकता है उनके difficult behaviors में, लेकिन ये कहना कि उनका autism चला जाएगा, इसका इलाज हो जाएगा, ये किसी दिन खत्म हो जाएगा, ये कहना अभी हम ये बात बिल्कुल नहीं कह सकते हैं. और इसका ये कारण है कि ऑटिज्म एक जेनेटिक डिसऑर्डर है. तो इसके रीजंस, इसके कॉजेज क्या है, ये क्यों होता है, जब तक हमारे पास कॉजेज अवेलेबल नहीं है तब तक हम किसी क्योर के बारे में बात नहीं कर सकते. लेकिन बिहेवियर मॉडिफिकेशन एक बहुत अहम चीज होती है ऑटिज्म को मैनेज करने में.
As you said, it is being recognized by odd behaviors and sensory difficulties. So can we say these sensory difficulties or these odd behaviors, these further progress to a greater extent, like if a child is 2 or 3 years old, the sensory difficulties are present at that time also. But as the child grows older, does that goes to a greater extent?
Sometimes they may change altogether. Sometimes you may find that a child who may not have displayed certain kinds of behavior at the age of 4 or 5 may be doing it at the age of 5 or may be doing it at the age of 13 or 14. Okay, so how exactly these behaviors and when they manifest, it cannot be predicted. What we can do is, when there are difficult behaviors that are presenting themselves, हम उन behavior के तह तक जा सकते हैं, इनके जड़ तक जा सकते हैं कि बच्चे को क्या तकलीफ है जिसकी वजह से वो इन behaviors को display कर रहा है, और उन वजहों को हम tackle करके उन behaviors को हम down कर सकते हैं. Can we go on to the next slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
This is a very, very important issue that we have to focus on. There is a great deal of difficulty in diagnosing children with autism, even though the symptoms, it is recognized, are very, very similar across cultures and across social and racial or linguistic communities. Symptoms बहुत similar होते हैं हर जगह. But we find that often autism goes either undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. Very often it is confused with mental retardation or mental illness. अक्सर ये term पागल यूज किया जाता है कि बच्चा पागल है. And इसका main कारण ये है due to lack of information and awareness both amongst professionals and laypersons alike. And one of the things we must also note is this word autism itself, ये एक अंग्रेजी शब्द है, ठीक है ना. इसका कोई हमारे local languages में, there is no local referent. हिंदी में आप autism को क्या बोलोगे, ठीक है ना. तो ये ऑटिज्म जो शब्द है, कई लोगों को ये बड़ा एलियन सा लगता है, ये कहीं विदेशों में पाया जाता है, हिंदुस्तान में होता नहीं है, ठीक है ना. So these are some of the important things we must keep in mind.
As we are discussing about like diagnosis of autism, so what is the right age in which we diagnose a child with autism? It's before the 3 years or after 3 years of age? What is the right age?
There is no right age. Any age, the earlier the better, as we say. The earlier you actually come to a diagnosis, the earlier you can initiate steps to take up intervention. So early diagnosis and early intervention is a very, very important aspect, and this is one of the chief areas which gets neglected in countries like India, जहाँ पे because doctors को स्वयं इतनी जानकारी नहीं है. हम और अब ये भी है कि अगर एक बच्चा बोल नहीं रहा है, एक बच्चे के बिहेवियर्स थोड़े पेरेंट्स को लग रहा है कि कुछ ठीक नहीं है, कुछ बच्चे में प्रॉब्लम है, ये नॉर्मल डेवलपमेंट नहीं है, तो अक्सर हम देखते हैं कि लोग उनको कहते हैं नहीं, आप ओवर रिएक्ट कर रहे हो, बच्चा चल रहा है, बच्चा सब कुछ कर रहा है, बच्चा खेल रहा है, बच्चा मतलब रिटार्डेड या पागल लगता नहीं है. ये अक्सर हमको सुनने को मिलता है. तो इसमें कोई खराबी नहीं है. तो अगर आप उसको स्टिम्युलेट ठीक से नहीं कर रहे हो, आप उसको ठीक से इनपुट्स नहीं दे रहे हो, आप इसके साथ मेहनत नहीं कर रहे हो, और आजकल ये भी चल रहा है कि हम देख रहे हैं कि जॉइंट फैमिली जो है उसका काफ़ी अब असर कम होता जा रहा है. हम देख रहे हैं कि हस्बैंड्स एंड वाइफ्स अपने बच्चों के साथ अलग अलग गृहस्थियों में रह रहे हैं ड्यू टू माइग्रेशन एंड अदर थिंग्स. वील कम टू इट इन अ मिनट. इसकी वजह से ये भी माना जाता है कि बच्चे को ठीक से स्टिम्युलेशन नहीं मिल रहा है, इसी की वजह से वो बोल नहीं रहा है, इसी की वजह से उसमें कुछ ये समस्याएं उत्पन्न हो रही. लेकिन एट दिस स्टेज वी मस्ट स्टेट कि ऑटिज्म पेरेंटिंग की वजह से नहीं होता है.
Exactly.
ये हम नहीं कह सकते हैं कि पेरेंट्स ने ठीक से मेहनत नहीं करी इसीलिए बच्चे में ये समस्या हुई. ऑटिज्म इज समथिंग दैट इज प्रेजेंट फ्रॉम बर्थ. इट इज जस्ट दैट द सिम्टम्स शो अ लिटिल लेटर.
So it's a genetic disorder basically.
Right. I mean, as far as our current knowledge goes.
Yes.
Okay. Any other precipitating factors apart from genetic? Or
There is a
hereditary?
lot of research going on.
A lot of
about
research and a lot of theories that are going around. एक बीच में बहुत एक जोरदार एक थियोरी चली थी कि कुछ वैक्सीनेशंस की वजह से ऑटिज्म कॉज होता है. बट द रिसर्च इज ऑन गोइंग. हम किसी सर्टेनिटी के साथ नहीं कह सकते हैं कि दिस इज द पॉजिटिव फैक्टर.
Okay.
ठीक है ना. इस पे बाहर भी बहुत रिसर्च भी चल रहा है और ये बहुत ही विवादित मुद्दे हैं क्योंकि इनमें बहुत सारे इंटरेस्ट और इन्वॉल्व हैं.
Right.
ठीक है ना. तो इनके बारे में जब तक कोई पुख्ता रिसर्च, कोई मतलब सॉलिड फाइंडिंग्स हमारे पास अवेलेबल नहीं है, इस विषय में कुछ कहना मुनासिब नहीं होगा. एंड सेकेंडली हम लोगों का, आई एम अ सोशल साइंटिस्ट, आई एम नॉट अ मेडिकल पर्सन और आई एम नॉट अ क्लिनिशियन दैट आई कैन कॉमेंट विद एनी अथॉरिटी ऑन दीज मैटर्स. सो आई वुड लाइक टू स्टिक टू द एरिया दैट आई एम comfortable with, which is the area of sociology and social science research. Can I go on?
Yes.
This is really what is at the heart of our teleconference today. We are talking about the impact of autism on families and therefore how we can support families. Now, upon the family falls the responsibility of obtaining diagnosis, accessing appropriate services and facilities. The family is responsible for the lifelong care of the child. And this is an important point. Families have different concerns across the life course. Then, of course, there are financial, physical, and emotional stressors. The family is under tremendous stress. And this is critical. There is no answer as yet to that question that is there on the minds of all the families. What happens when we are gone? When we are no longer there to look after this child, who is going to take over? Who is going to take up the care? And I think in this context, Indrani would probably like to share her views as a mother of a 17-year-old boy. How have your concerns changed from the time your child was very little to the fact that now he's a teenager and very soon he'll be an adult? Maybe you could.
Well, as far as obtaining a diagnosis is concerned, I think most of us go through a very similar, journey. As Shubhangi said, initially people tend to tell you that there's nothing wrong with your child, he's absolutely okay, you haven't spent enough time with him, you're too ambitious, especially if the mother's working. Then you're definitely, you've caused the autism or you've caused the child to be different. Zara sa zyada time bitao bachche ke sath, theek ho jayega. And I think धीरे-धीरे at some point of time the family is certain that there is something that is not quite right. But then obtaining diagnosis is not an easy thing. Because अभी भी हमारे medical profession में पिछले 10 सालों से the awareness has increased, but अभी भी काफ़ी pediatricians को शायद सिर्फ autism शब्द की जानकारी है, and they really don't know what it actually means. So, and that is your first point of query, because that is where you take your child to a pediatrician, and if he's going to tell you that everything is okay and spend time, you've already lost some time. And then you keep looking, you go to an ENT, you get all the tests done, and most of the parents that I have interacted with and I have worked with have gone through the battery of tests that most of us have gone through, the MRI, the EEG, which often shows off as normal. And then if you're lucky, then at some point of time somebody guides you to either a psychologist or a psychiatrist or someone
special educator,
who could help you, a special educator, and then you get the diagnosis.
इसमें एक बहुत अहम मुद्दा है. जिन टेस्ट के बारे में इंद्रानी ने जिक्र किया है, ये सब बहुत महंगे होते हैं. और आप सोचिए कि एक मिडिल क्लास फैमिली या एक अपर मिडिल क्लास फैमिली फिर भी अपने बच्चों के लिए बहुत पैसा खर्च करती है, बहुत मेहनत करती है, एक जगह से दूसरी जगह जाती है, लेकिन जिनके पास साधन नहीं है, जो छोटे छोटे गांवों में, कस्बों में हैं, उनका क्या होता होगा। तो इसीलिए हम जब ये वर्ड मिसडायग्नोस्ड और अनडायग्नोस्ड कहते हैं, ऐसे लाखों बच्चे हैं इस मुल्क में जिन्होंने जिनको कभी ये सुविधा नहीं मिली कि डॉक्टर उनका ठीक से जांच करे और उनको बतलाए, उनके पेरेंट्स को बतलाए कि इस बच्चे को ये समस्या है, जिसके लिए उसके लिए फैसिलिटीज या मदद उपलब्ध है। तो ये एक बहुत अहम मुद्दा है कि परिवारों के ऊपर पूरी जिम्मेदारी आती है कि पहले आप देखिए कि बच्चे का डेवलपमेंट किस प्रकार से हो रहा है, फिर उसके लिए डायग्नोसिस के लिए जहां तहां दुनिया भर के ठोकरें खाएं इधर से उधर, और फाइनली जब आपको पता चल गया है कि आपके बच्चे को ये समस्या है, तब जिंदगी भर आप उस बच्चे के साथ क्या करोगे और आप जब खत्म हो जाओगे उसके बाद भी उस बच्चे का क्या इंतजाम होगा, ये सारा जिम्मा परिवार पे आता है। जो कि एक आप कल्पना कर सकते हैं कि हर परिवार में कितना स्ट्रेस इस वजह से होता है, एंड हाउ वेरी वेरी डिफिकल्ट इट इज फॉर फैमिलीज टू प्लान सो लॉन्ग टर्म एंड इवन आफ्टर देयर लाइफ टाइम्स as to what is going to happen to the child.
So where should families go basically for the diagnosis?
We'll come to that in a bit.
Okay.
But before we come to where should families go, let's actually develop this point a little further and look at the impact that autism has on different members of the family. सबसे पहले we start with impact upon the mother, because the mother, as you know, is usually the primary caregiver. Culturally, motherhood is regarded as the most important, the defining goal in the life of an Indian woman. Okay? And she is believed, it is believed that माँ की वजह से या तो बच्चा बन सकता है या उसका नाश हो सकता है. She can either make or she can spoil her child. And माँ के ऊपर ये ब्लेम करने की जो प्रवृत्ति है, ये बहुत टाइम से हम देख रहे हैं, और मैं इसके ऊपर थोड़ी चर्चा भी करना चाहूंगी. द थियोरी ऑफ द रेफ्रिजरेटर मदर, जो वेस्ट में बहुत एक पॉपुलर थियोरी थी, थियोरी से ज्यादा एक मिथ थी. ब्रूनो बेटलहाइम नाम के एक साइको एनालिस्ट ने ये कहा कि जो बच्चे ऑटिस्टिक हैं, वो उनका जो प्रॉब्लम है वो उनकी माँओं की वजह से है, क्योंकि उन्होंने माँ की ममता प्राप्त नहीं की है. उनकी माँ यूजुअली हाईली पढ़ी लिखी है, करियर वुमन है, बहुत एम्बिशियस है, इसीलिए अपने बच्चे को अपनी ममता का कोल्ड मदर, वो उसमें ममता नहीं है. चूंकि उसमें ममता नहीं है, वो बच्चा दुनिया से रिट्रीट होता है और जो ऑटिज्म के जो सारे लक्षण हैं वो डिस्प्ले करना शुरू करता है. और इस बच्चे के लिए एक ही इलाज हो सकता है कि उसको उस कोल्ड माँ के चपेट से निकाला जाए और उसको थोड़ा वार्मथ और थोड़ा उसको नर्चर, ये जो, और कौन करेगा ये, वो वही साइको एनालिस्ट और वही साइकोलॉजिस्ट इस बच्चे को वार्मथ देंगे, ममता देंगे, जिससे वो बच्चा धीरे धीरे ऑटिज्म से निकल आएगा. आज की तारीख में हम इस बात को लेके हंसते हैं, लेकिन आप कल्पना कीजिए कि एक पूरी पीढ़ी माओं की थी वेस्टर्न सोसाइटी में, जो इस गिल्ट, जो इस ब्लेम के बोझ तले जूझी है कि हमारी वजह से हमारा बच्चा ऑटिस्टिक हो गया है. और इन आवर कॉन्टेक्स्ट, इंडियन संदर्भ में भी, हालांकि हमारे पास रेफ्रिजरेटर मदर एज सच की थियोरी नहीं है, लेकिन माँ का जो ब्लेम होता है, माँ के ऊपर जो जिम्मेदारी होती है, ये बहुत अधिक मायने रखती है. यहाँ पे आप देखते हैं, हमने कितने केसेस देखे हैं कि ससुराल वाले कहते हैं, अरे तुम्हारे घर में कुछ गड़बड़ थी, तुम्हारे खून में खराबी है तो तुम्हारा बच्चा ऐसे हो गया है, या तुम ठीक से तुम्हारे अंदर ममता नहीं है, तुमको बच्चे को पालना नहीं आता है, तुमको बच्चे की परवरिश करनी नहीं आती है, तुम्हारी वजह से बच्चा ऐसे हो गया. हमारे घर में तो भैया ऐसा कोई बच्चा नहीं था, ये सब तुम अपने साइड से लेके आई हो. तो ये जो एक ब्लेम गेम होता है, ये हम बहुत केसेस में देखते हैं. इट इज अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट थिंग टू ओवरकम.
And that's more in rural areas.
No,
Absolutely
no, that is where you're mistaken. Okay. Absolutely not.
It is there. It is completely there in every area. In fact, there could be times when in a rural area you would have families more supportive, but I think we'll talk about that later.
We'll talk about that in a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
To go on with the responsibilities or the effect on the mother, you find that she has the responsibility of daily care. She has to take on multiple roles. This is very important. The role of the carer, the role of the playmate, teacher, and advocate for her child. There are very unrealistic expectations and overwhelming responsibilities. And the mother is also expected to sacrifice her own goals, sacrifice her own interests, sacrifice her own life in a sense, in order to devote her life to the care of the child. Can we explain this a bit? The slide can go off if need be.
You can explain that.
Yeah. what we're trying to drive home here is that mothers require specifically a great deal of support and a great deal of counseling, because when you tell a mother that this child's problem is due to you, you then also expect certain kinds of overcompensatory behaviors from the mother.
Right.
You expect that the mother is going to give up her goals, you expect the mother is going to devote her entire life looking after that. माँ नहीं करेगी तो कौन करेगा? ये जो एक expectations है, ये माओ के ऊपर एक बहुत बड़ा जिम्मा पड़ता है. और आप ये भी देखिए कि जैसे माँ की एज बढ़ती है, बच्चा जब छोटा है तब वो सब कुछ कर रही है, लेकिन जैसे बच्चा बड़ा हो रहा है, इंद्रानी इज अ मदर ऑफ अ 17-year-old बॉय, एक 17 साल के 18 साल के लड़के को उसको उसके डेली नीड्स का केयर करना ये बहुत मुश्किल होता है, क्योंकि उस एज में हमारी अपनी सेहत सफर करने लगती है, हम खुद एज हो रहे हैं, एंटरिंग इनटू मिडिल एज. And as we are aging, as we are growing more tired, the demands of our children are growing. But you are expected to constantly fulfill these demands. Indrani, any comments you would like to give?
I'd probably like to talk about the multiple roles bit, because and especially because हमारे यहाँ पे उतनी facilities नहीं है. Carer, हमारा job 24/7 365 days है. Playmate, because हमारे बच्चों में एक social interaction की difficulty है. We are there, हम उनके बेस्ट फ्रेंड भी हैं. उनके टीचर, उनको जो भी सिखाना पड़ता है, सबसे ज़्यादा जिम्मा, बिकॉज हमारे साथ ही वो लोग टाइम बिताते हैं. वी आर देयर प्राइमरी टीचर्स. एंड एडवोकेट, हर जगह जहाँ भी हम बच्चे के साथ जाएं, हमें एट सम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम उनके सामने ढाल की तरह खड़ा होना पड़ता है. सो इतनी सारी रोल्स एक इंसान एंड एट सम पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम ट्रूली अकेली काफी बहुत ही मुश्किल हो सकता है, which is why yes, the mother needs an incredible amount of support.
So the question that arises here is, where are the fathers? Let's talk about them. They are very much around. The impact of autism upon fathers, we notice, we find that when the mother is given this responsibility of constantly looking after the child, being with the child on a 24/7 365 days a week basis, पिता के ऊपर फिर जिम्मा, जो ब्रेड विनर का जो जिम्मा है कि आप परिवार का लालन पालन सारा, मतलब कमाना, बचाना, भविष्य की चिंता करना, ये सारे ये जो अहम जिम्मेदारी है, ये पिता के ऊपर बहुत ही मतलब स्ट्रॉन्ग वे में आ जाती है. रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी फॉर द चाइल्ड्स फ्यूचर. इज द स्लाइड ऑन और कैन वी जस्ट रन थ्रू इट? Responsibility for the child's future. Lack of support due to the withdrawal of the child's mother from the workforce. Inability to relate with the child and its needs. Competition at the workplace. And beliefs about deficient manhood. I'll deal with these points in a minute. हम देखते हैं कि कई बार जब पिता पे इतना भारी जिम्मा आता है कि आपको सब कुछ भविष्य के लिए आपको सोचना है, करना है, अक्सर हम देखते हैं कि कुछ पिता इस चीज को बहाना बना के घर से दूर रहना शुरू करते हैं, और जितना वो घर से दूर रहते हैं, उनका जो एबिलिटी टू कनेक्ट विद द चाइल्ड, बच्चे के साथ जो रिश्ता है और माँ के साथ जो रिश्ता है, उसमें डिक्लाइन हो जाता है, और इसकी वजह से वो और घर से हटना शुरू करते हैं. अब ये भी हम कह सकते हैं कि वी आर नॉट, हम भी ब्लेम गेम नहीं कर रहे हैं. वी रियलाइज हाउ डिफिकल्ट इट इज आज की कंपेटिटिव माहौल में एक नौकरी करना, कमाना, परिवार के लिए सोचना, ये बहुत बड़े रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज हैं. लेकिन कई बार हम देखते हैं कि बच्चे की डिसेबिलिटी का बहाना लेके कई बार men tend to escape from the domestic front, and this is very bad, not just for the child but for the father himself, because he loses connectivity with the child. It is very important for the father to be as connected, as involved with the upbringing of the child as it is for the mother. That is when you can say that the family situation is complete, or it is a healthy one, when both the parents are equally involved with the child's care. Right. But also we find that because many mothers, and in my own study I discovered that many working women who are highly qualified just gave up their careers because there was nobody to take on the responsibility of looking after the child. And agar aap dekho in human resource terms, this is a great loss to the country.
Exactly.
When highly qualified, highly educated mothers have to leave their workplace just so that they can look after the child, because no facilities have been provided by the community and the state which can provide for childcare or which can look after their children in a good and in a satisfactory manner. Let's move on to the impact of autism on siblings, which I think is an area often neglected. We very rarely talk about it, but it is very, very important. Siblings are expected to become surrogate parents. They're expected to contribute to the care of the autistic siblings. Their own needs, doubts and fears are seldom addressed. They have a lot of peer pressures which they have to deal with, and there is a lack of support groups and counseling for siblings.
So you can just go ahead with the explanation.
Okay, what happens is अक्सर जब एक परिवार में एक बच्चा है जिसे स्पेशल नीड्स हैं, जो डिसेबल्ड है, किसी भी तरह की डिसेबिलिटी, हम देखते हैं कि पूरा समाज एक तरह से बीड़ा उठाता है कि पेरेंट्स को समझाया जाए कि भाई यू मस्ट नाउ हैव वन नॉर्मल चाइल्ड। एक समझदार बच्चा तो होना बहुत ही जरूरी है, नहीं तो आपके बाद इस बच्चे का ख्याल कौन रखेगा? इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी, एग्जैक्टली। द नॉर्मल चाइल्ड इज रिगार्डेड एज एन इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी। और अक्सर हम देखते हैं कि उनके जन्म से पहले ही, उनके पैदा होने से पहले ही ये जो भाई या बहन है उन्हें इस दुनिया में लाया इसलिए जाता है क्योंकि हमें एक इंश्योरेंस चाहिए अपने डिसेबल्ड बच्चे की केयर करने के लिए।
Right.
और ये अगर आप सोचें कितना बड़ा एक जिम्मा है एक छोटी सी जान के ऊपर कि जब से उसने होश संभाला है उसको पता है कि भाई आप समझदार हो। और हम देखते हैं कि बच्चा चाहे एल्डर ब्रदर हो या यंगर ब्रदर हो, एल्डर सिस्टर हो या यंगर सिस्टर हो, उसे हमेशा एल्डर की तरह ट्रीट किया जाता है।
Right.
तो कई बार मैंने देखा और बड़ी कभी कभी आई यूज्ड टू फाइंड इट वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग, एक छोटी सी 4 साल की बच्ची अपने 12 साल के भाई को एकदम समझा रही है दादी माँ की तरह, जैसे शी इज द एल्डर एंड माँ उसको कह रही कि भाई अपने भाई को संभालो, देखो वो क्या कर रहा है। तो वो एक बड़े बहन या भाई का जिम्मा उठाती है। लेकिन हालांकि समटाइम्स वी थिंक कि देखो कितने समझदार बच्चे हैं, कितने अच्छे बच्चे हैं, कितने कितने हेल्प करते हैं अपने पेरेंट्स की। साइकोलॉजिकली कई बार ये चीज बच्चों के ऊपर बहुत गहरा असर करती है। And Indrani, you have an only child. If I may ask a personal question, weren't you always advised go ahead and have a second
Absolutely.
child?
always.
Okay.
But it was essentially the insurance policy bit, and of course, as I've seen even whilst working with other parents, that either the child it's very difficult to keep equilibrium. Okay, I think you've done an admirable job yourself. But या तो सारा फोकस ऑटिस्टिक बच्चे पे जाता है या वो बच्चा इग्नोर हो जाता है एंड ऑल योर होप्स एंड ड्रीम्स आर पुट ऑन टू द चाइल्ड विदाउट ऑटिज्म। वो इक्विलिब्रियम रखना बहुत मुश्किल है।
बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हैं। कई बार ये हम सोचते हैं कि जो द नॉर्मल सिबलिंग, सो कॉल्ड नॉर्मल सिबलिंग, उसको हम एक सुपर चाइल्ड, एक वंडर चाइल्ड बनाने की कोशिश करते हैं। हमारी सारी जो आशाएं अभिलाषाएं जो कि डिसेबल बच्चा कभी पूरा नहीं कर पाएगा, वो सारी आशाएं अभिलाषाएं हम उस रेगुलरली डेवलपिंग बच्चे के ऊपर डाल देते हैं, जिसकी वजह से द बर्डन ऑफ एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ सच चिल्ड्रन इज वेरी वेरी ग्रेट। एंड एक जो इम्पॉर्टेंट बात है पीयर प्रेशर की, जब हम ऑटिज्म स्पेसिफिकली की बात करते हैं, हम देखते हैं कि ऑटिज्म में जो बहुत ही पिक्यूलियर जो बिहेवियर्स होते हैं, जो मैनिफेस्टेशन ऑफ ऑटिज्म होता है, इट कैन बी सोशली एक्सट्रीमली एम्बैरेसिंग फॉर अ सिबलिंग टू टेक दैट चाइल्ड अराउंड और टू एक्नॉलेज दैट चाइल्ड एज हिज ब्रदर और सिस्टर। कई बार अब हम देखते हैं कि बच्चा अगर खेलने गया है, अपने ऑटिस्टिक सिबलिंग को लेके गया है, दूसरे कॉलोनी के बच्चे या मोहल्ले के बच्चे उंगलियां उठा के तेरा भाई पागल है, तेरी बहन पागल है। अब ये एक ग्रोइंग चाइल्ड के सेल्फ कॉन्सेप्ट के लिए एक बहुत ही डैमेजिंग चीज है। वो बच्चा अपने भाई या बहन से बेहद प्यार करता है, इसमें कोई दोहराए नहीं है, लेकिन उसके अंदर भी ये चीज आने लगती है कि मेरा भाई ऐसे क्यों है, मेरी बहन ऐसी क्यों है, और अगर वो ऐसा है तो क्या मुझ में भी कोई कमी है, मुझ में भी कोई खराबी है कि आगे जाके मेरे साथ ये हो सकता है। जैसे वो सिबलिंग बड़ा होता है और समस्याएं पैदा होती है और इश्यूज आते हैं, जब व्हेन अ सिबलिंग इज रीचिंग द एज कि ही इज रेडी टू स्टार्ट अ फैमिली और रेडी टू गेट मैरिड, दिस इशू, माई ओन सिबलिंग हैज दिस डिसऑर्डर, विल माई चिल्ड्रन हैव इट? Okay, will I be able to find a spouse? और ये खास तौर पे हम देखते हैं लड़कियों के केस में, इंडियन सोसाइटी बीइंग व्हाट इट इज ए हाईली पुरुष प्रधान समाज है, और लड़कियों की शादी एक बहुत बड़ा प्रोजेक्ट होता है पेरेंट्स का, एक अहम एक जिम्मेदारी होती है। तो अब अगर आपका एक ऑटिस्टिक बच्चा हो और फिर आपकी एक बेटी हो जिसकी आप शादी करवाना चाहते हैं, तो ये मुद्दा रेज जरूर होता है कि क्या लड़की को सूटेबल मैच मिलेगा, लड़की को स्वीकार करेंगे, क्या लड़की को जिंदगी भर ताने सुनने पड़ेंगे कि तुम्हारा भाई ऐसा, कल को अगर उसके बच्चे में कोई डिफिकल्टी हो तो शी विल हैव टू लिसन टू दिस फॉर द रेस्ट ऑफ हर लाइफ। So these are very very serious issues which are never really addressed. हम देखते हैं कि पेरेंट सपोर्ट ग्रुप्स बहुत आजकल इंडिया में बन रहे हैं, सिबलिंग सपोर्ट ग्रुप्स की बहुत तीव्र कमी है. और
I don't think
I don't know. I mean, if those of you who are listening are aware of any sibling groups, please do let us know, because it's very important to and those who are training to be to become professionals working with children and families, please do treat this as a very, very important focus of your future work. This is a very important area you have to talk about.
Yeah, as you have done research like on families of children having autism spectrum disorder, so you must have interacted with the parents and siblings also.
Right.
So what kind of problems have you interacted with them? Like what kind of problems they are facing when their children are having like autism, or what kind of problems the siblings face basically?
Well, I've already elaborated on the kinds of problems that the siblings are facing. I think एक जिसे हम कह सकते हैं कि समझदारी भी एक बहुत बड़ा बर्डन होती है ऐसे केस में. आप समझदार हो इसीलिए आप सैक्रिफाइस करो. आपका खिलौना है, आप समझदार हो, उसको प्रॉब्लम है, अपना खिलौना दे दो. दिस गोज ऑन एंड अल्टीमेटली ये जो गार्डियनशिप की इशू है कि जो फैमिली सोचते हैं कि हमारे बात कौन करेगा. अगर आपके पास एक सक्षम या एक एबल बच्चा है तो आप ऑटोमेटिकली मान के चलते हो कि नहीं जी, वो तो उसकी समस्या मेरा जो बेटा है या बेटी है वो संभालेगी. बेटियों के केस में थोड़ा कम, क्योंकि हम ये अक्सर देखा जाता है कि वो तो अपने घर चली जाएगी. लेकिन अगर एक रेगुलरली डेवलपिंग बेटा है तो ये मान के पेरेंट्स चलते हैं कि हमारे डिसेबल्ड बच्चे का लाइफ लॉन्ग केयर ये भाई ले लेगा, जो कि एक बहुत ही अनफेयर एक्सपेक्टेशन मेरे हिसाब से है. कि शुरू से आप बच्चे का जो potentials for growth, potentials for doing what he or she wants to, आप उसको शुरू से लिमिट कर रहे हो. लेकिन इसको एक पॉजिटिव वे में भी देखा जा सकता है. ये भी कई शोध हैं जो कहते हैं कि जिन बच्चों को एक डेवलपमेंटली डिसेबल्ड सिबलिंग है, वो उन बच्चों में रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, उन बच्चों में एबिलिटी टू टेक लीडरशिप रोल्स, ये बहुत developed होती है compared to other children. So there is a flip side also. We cannot just say that having a child with a disability it's terrible for siblings. That would be subscribing to very old fashioned theories जिसमें believe करते थे कि अगर एक बच्चा disabled है तो पूरा परिवार disabled है. हम इस मॉडल से अब निकल आ चुके हैं और हम एक डिसेबल्ड बच्चे की जो मतलब हमारे घर में एक डिसेबल्ड बच्चे जो पॉजिटिवली कंट्रीब्यूट कर सकते हैं और जो पॉजिटिव कोपिंग है उसके बारे में भी हम बहुत अब आगे निकल चुके हैं. एंड फैसिलिटेटिंग पॉजिटिव कोपिंग इज अ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट ऑफ प्रोवाइडिंग सपोर्ट टू फैमिलीज.
Indeed, a very good point. So till now we studied about what is autism. Basically, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, and the child is having problems in the language, communication and social skills pertaining to certain odd behaviors as well as their sensory problems. It is said to be an autism spectrum disorder. Why a spectrum disorder? Because there are variable kind of symptoms involved. That's why I say it is an autism spectrum disorder. And usually, autism is often misdiagnosed or it is not diagnosed at all because of the lack of awareness and the lack of information with the professionals as well as the parents. Now if we go on talking the impact on the mother, because she is the primary caregiver and she plays multiple roles, that of a playmate or that of a caretaker. So basically the blame of having an autistic child goes to the mother. All the family members blame the mother that because of you the child is being born autistic or have autism. The next is the father. Basically he has to earn the bread and money and all that for the family. He is playing a breadwinning role. And usually sometimes the father just escapes the situation, and because of this they lose the connectivity with both the mother as well as the child. Next we talked about the impact on the siblings. Basically they tend to play the role of the surrogate parents, and there's a mostly involved the peer pressure on them, and we hardly have any kind of like peer groups or the counselor groups for them. So we'll carry on with our discussion after a short break. It's time for a short break. See you after that.
This is Aparna. She loves chess and Shah Rukh Khan. Her best friend is Swati. She also has visual impairment. This is Neeraj.
हवा धीरे धीरे चल रही।
He plays many instruments.
सुनो जो कहानी
He loves Mohammad Rafi and cricket.
ये कहानी सदियों पुरानी है, ये कहानी हमें सुना।
He also uses crutches for mobility.
धीरे धीरे
चंदा है तू, मेरा सूरज है तू,
This is Raj Bala.
मेरी आँखों का तारा है तू, जीती हूँ मैं बस तुझे देख कर।
With a husband and daughter. She loves cooking and watching TV.
सूरज है तू, आ मेरी आँखों का तारा है तू।
She also has cerebral palsy. Look beyond the disability. Look at the person.
The state of knowledge exists. The will, the capacity, and method are usually the problem. मानसिक मंदता एक ऐसी विकलांगता है जो 18 वर्ष की आयु से पूर्व कभी भी हो सकती है, जिसमें व्यवहार अनुकूलता में कमी एवं बुद्धि क्षमता 70% से कम होती है। Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. भारतीय पुनर्वास परिषद द्वारा देश भर में पंजीकृत केंद्र इस बात को प्रमाणित करते हैं। NIMH प्रादेशिक केंद्र नई दिल्ली एक ऐसा ही केंद्र है जहां छात्रों को प्रशिक्षण दिया जाता है। जिसके उपरांत वे मंद बुद्धि बच्चों की सेवा में नियुक्त होते हैं। क्लासरूम टीचिंग, ग्रुप टीचिंग एवं भारतीय पुनर्वास परिषद के नव शिखर चैनल पर प्रसारित टेलीकॉन्फ्रेंसेस द्वारा संबंधित विषयों पर विस्तार पूर्वक ज्ञान दिया जाता है। मेडिकल, ऑक्यूपेशनल थेरेपी, फिजियोथेरेपी, स्पीच थेरेपी, साइकोलॉजी और स्पेशल एजुकेशन जैसे क्षेत्रों में छात्रों को प्रशिक्षित किया जाता है। प्रयोगात्मक अनुभव एवं अभ्यास के लिए टीचर ट्रेनिंग प्रोग्राम के उपरांत छात्रों को मंद बुद्धि बच्चों के साथ कक्षाओं में नियुक्त किया जाता है और इंडिविजुअलाइज्ड एजुकेशन प्लान का भी आधार बनाया जाता है, जिससे वे संपूर्ण शिक्षा एवं चिकित्सा शैली को समझ सकें। इस पूरे प्रशिक्षण कार्यक्रम के दौरान विद्यार्थी जर्नल्स, न्यूज़लेटर्स, पेरियोडिकल्स, चार्ट्स, मॉडल्स, कंप्यूटर ट्रेनिंग एवं टेक्स्ट बुक्स का उपयोग कर सकते हैं। कहते हैं, कीप योर फेस टू द सनशाइन एंड यू कैन नॉट सी द शैडो। इसी बात को ध्यान में रखते हुए विद्यार्थियों को सरकारी एवं गैर सरकारी संस्थाओं में नियुक्त किया जाता है, जहां वे मंद बुद्धि बच्चों के लिए निरीक्षण, प्रशिक्षण एवं अनुसंधान का दायित्व संभालते हैं और इसके पश्चात ये विद्यार्थी इस प्रशिक्षण का उपयोग मंदबुद्धि बच्चों के सामाजिक एवं शैक्षणिक उत्थान एवं विकास में करते हैं और एक लक्ष्य की ओर आगे बढ़ते हैं। और फिर लक्ष्य कितना ही दूर हो, फासला नजरों का धोखा भी तो हो सकता है। वो मिले या ना मिले, हाथ बढ़ाकर देखो।
वेलकम बैक। ब्रेक पे जाने से पहले वी हैव डिस्कस्ड अबाउट व्हाट इज ऑटिज्म एंड बेसिकली दिस ऑटिज्म इज लेफ्ट अनडायग्नोज्ड or it is misdiagnosed because of the lack of the awareness or the information among the professionals and the parents. We were discussing about the impact on the different family members as well as on the siblings. Being a mother, the whole sole responsibility of caregiving of the child goes to the mother. She is the primary caregiver and she has to play the multiple roles, that of a caretaker or a playmate, and she has overwhelming responsibilities and unrealistic expectations to deal with. Being a father, usually he has to have a breadwinning role into the family, and because of this, he loses the connectivity with the mother as well as with the child. And if we talk about the siblings, they tend to play the role of the surrogate parents, and there are lack of the there are very peer pressures involved in them, and there's a lack of the peer group and counseling for them. So apart from discussing the impact on the mother, the father as well as on the siblings, let's ask, what about the other family members?
Sure,
what are the impact on them?
That's an important question, and let's look at the impact upon grandparents. Now you find in are becoming more and more prominent. Grandparents are a very, very important part of any family structure, and whether it is the maternal grandparents, nana nani, or whether it is the paternal grandparents, dada dadi, we often find that in urban contexts, mothers are able to go to work because they have either a very helpful mother-in-law or a very helpful mother with whom they leave their children and go. And very little work really has been done upon the kind of impact that a child's autism has on his or her grandparents. And we find that there are conflicting feelings amongst grandparents for their own children and the autistic grandchild, blame game and generation gap, difficulty in understanding new theories of child development. However, we may add that supportive grandparents are an immense source of strength. Now, to elaborate on these points a bit, you find that a grandparent is torn between two kinds of feelings. On the one hand, he or she feels, very, very great, sympathy or empathy with their son or daughter. That is the parent of the child with autism. And on the other hand, there is a feeling of love also. हर दादा दादी या हर नाना नानी अपने पोते पोती को या नाती नतनी को बहुत प्यार करते हैं, चाहते हैं। एक बहुत बड़ा पड़ाव होता है एक इंसान के जीवन में कि मैं दादा बन गया, दादी बन गई, नाना बन गया, नानी बन गई। लेकिन जब इस बच्चे में ऐसी समस्याएं हैं जिसकी वजह से हमारा अपना बच्चा इतना परेशान है, तो एक माँ सोचेगी कि देखो इस बच्चे की वजह से मेरी बेटी कितनी परेशान है, मेरा बेटा कितना परेशान है। तो कभी कभी उनके फीलिंग्स में they are torn between, they're like falling between two stools, the love for the grandchild as well as the concern and the immense feeling of sympathy for their own child. And Indrani, what has been your experience with your mother? And
well, I think I've been incredibly blessed as far as my parents are concerned, and my extended family is concerned. They've been very, very supportive. But they also took some time to understand autism, to understand the fact that it's a lifelong disorder. But I think in a nutshell, they've been incredibly supportive. Though as far as work is concerned, the one thing that I have noticed is that grandparents tend to indulge. वो बहुत ज़्यादा प्यार देने की कोशिश करते हैं अपने ग्रैंडचिल्ड्रन को, और जो काम ऑफन माँ करती है उसको वो बोलते हैं, but this is not normal parenting. ऐसे करके हम लोगों ने तो आपको इस तरह से नहीं पाला है, तो आप why are you using these newfangled methods? और at that point of time अगर वो और ज़रा सा सपोर्टिव हो सके, ज़रा सा समझ सके कि हमारे बच्चे थोड़े से अलग हैं, थोड़े से अलग तरीके से सीखते हैं, And if they can also be part of that entire process, I would say it's a wonderful thing for the child and for the parents.
बिल्कुल.
Right.
I mean, the experience, the richness of experience that a child can get through encounters with the grandparents, through being with the grandparents, they're very, very important. लेकिन मैं फिर से इस बात को दोहराना चाहती हूँ, this difficulty in understanding new theories of child development. हम देखते हैं कि जब एक 2 साल का बच्चा जो बोल नहीं रहा है, पेरेंट्स कंसर्न होते हैं या उसको किसी मतलब डॉक्टर के पास लेके जाते हैं, स्पेशल एजुकेटर के पास लेके जाते हैं, साइकोलॉजिस्ट के पास लेके जाते हैं. ग्रैंडपेरेंट्स कहते हैं कि भाई तुम लोग क्या इस बच्चे से एक्सपेक्ट करते हो. और ये एक बड़ी कॉमन थियरी है कि लड़के लेट बोलते हैं. ये हम अक्सर सुनते हैं that boys talk late. तो अगर आपका बच्चा बोल नहीं रहा है, आपको कंसर्न्स हो रहे हैं कि मेरा बच्चा नॉर्मली डेवलप नहीं कर रहा है, तो यू फाइंड द ओल्डर जनरेशन, ये तुम नए विचारों के लोग, तुम लोग कुछ ज्यादा ही पढ़ लिख चुके हो, तुम लोग ये पढ़ते हो, वो पढ़ते हो, वेस्ट से ये सीखते हो, सब गलत है. देखो वेस्ट में कितनी बच्चों के साथ समस्याएं हो रही है, इन लोगों को थोड़ी अपने बच्चों को पालना आता है, हमारे संस्कार देखो. जो सारी चीजें बिल्कुल सच है, लेकिन द फैक्ट इज कि अगर एक बच्चे के अंदर ऑटिज्म है और वो मैनिफेस्ट हो रहा है, और अगर माँ बाप उसको देख रहे हैं, परेशान हो रहे हैं और इसका एक आंसर ढूंढ रहे हैं, तो इस प्रक्रिया में ग्रैंड पेरेंट्स को उनका समर्थन करना चाहिए, न कि उनके डाउट्स को नकारना चाहिए या उनके डाउट्स को एकदम मजाक उड़ा देना चाहिए. हम समझते हैं कि ग्रैंड पेरेंट्स भी उतने ही बल्कि उससे ज्यादा कंसर्न्ड है अपने ग्रैंड चाइल्ड के बारे में. हम कहते हैं ना कि मूल के ऊपर जो सूद होता है वही वो प्यारा होता है, तो वही वाली चीज है. लेकिन once again I would like to reiterate that जहाँ पे ग्रैंड पेरेंट्स एक सपोर्टिव रोल अदा करते हैं both for their own children as well as for the grandchild, you know, it can really ease a great deal of burden from the parents' shoulders. And in terms of caregiving also, we've spoken earlier about working mothers or mothers having to give up their jobs. We find that those women who prefer to work or are able to retain their jobs usually do so because they have very, very supportive mothers of their own. कि वो अपने बच्चे को आराम से और एकदम निश्चिंत होकर मम्मी के पास रख सकते हैं, तब जाके वो अपने दूसरे काम कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि उनको पता है कि और कोई रखेगा नहीं रखेगा, मेरी माँ रखेगी. तो ये जितना बड़ा एक ये साइकोलॉजिकल और इमोशनल सपोर्ट है, वो शायद ही मतलब इसका कोई सब्स्टिट्यूट हो सकता है.
Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Now, what basically we have been building up our discussion so far to is we have to contextualize. When we talk about family, we're talking about family in a changing social setting. We find that we've had industrialization, urbanization, and migration taking place, leading to nucleation of families, dwindling of traditional support networks. However, new support systems are not yet in place. The role of friendship circles and support groups is growing. And very importantly, the mass media, it has become a very important agency of information and awareness in today's world. Now, it must be immediately clarified that I'm speaking from a very urban perspective. Perhaps these realities don't yet obtain fully in rural areas. But in urban India, we're finding a sea change in the way family structure is organized, how families support each other, who do we call upon in times of support. We find that migration more and more in a city like Delhi, you find so many people are coming from other parts of the country. You know, their parents, their siblings may be in another part of the country and they're coming here for work, they're coming here on transfer. Very often we find that because of a child's autism, they also leave their towns and come to places where they will get medical and educational facilities.
Absolutely.
You know, for instance, many families from various parts of the country would come to Delhi because दिल्ली के अंदर आपके पास अस्पताल है, दिल्ली में एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट्स है, दिल्ली में NGOs हैं. बड़े शहरों में हम देखते हैं कि अक्सर परिवार पूरे मतलब अपना ये छोड़ के, जॉइंट परिवार छोड़ के अपने बच्चे को लेके इलाज के लिए बड़े मेट्रोपॉलिटन शहरों में आते हैं. और इसकी वजह से बहुत सारे डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स अराइज. जो एक सपोर्ट नेटवर्क होता है जॉइंट फैमिली का, वो उनसे छिन जाता है, और जो दोस्त हैं, जो अपने जैसे और परिवार हैं, उनकी अहमियत फिर बढ़ने लगती है.
Right.
And we see this particularly in the case of disability organizations or NGOs. We find that very many of the leading NGOs in the country which are dealing with disability issues in fact stemmed from the initiatives of parents,
Right.
and the initiatives of families.
Completely agree with you.
So this is a very, very important point we have to. at the same time, we also have to talk about the kind of stigma that disability still carries. Now, traditionally, it was viewed as a product of past sins, the theory of karma, कि बुरे कर्मों की वजह से आज के लाइफ में मेरा बच्चा या इंसान disabled है. Failed or incomplete personhood, family taint, the belief that it is inheritable. However, in contemporary society, we find that education, intellectual attainments, achievement is very highly prized. And because of that, mental or learning disabilities are often hidden, they become a matter of shame, and there are issues of acceptance, which are very, very serious issues.
Exactly.
So this is an important thing to note, that even in the past, you had certain traditional notions about why a person is born disabled, which carried a good deal of stigma. But आज के दौर में आप ये expect कर सकते हो कि साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी इतना बढ़ गया है, लोग अब इतने जागरूक हैं, लोग इतने पढ़े लिखे हैं, इसकी वजह से थोड़ी और एक्सेप्टेंस बढ़नी चाहिए. लेकिन हम बिल्कुल एक ऑपोजिट प्रक्रिया कई बार देख रहे हैं. इंद्रानी, एनी व्यूज ऑन दिस?
एंड जो हम देखते हैं आजकल स्पेशली इज दैट nobody really talks about बुरे कर्मों के लिए है, मगर acceptance and especially extended family में बोलना, दोस्तों को बोलना फिर भी आसान हो जाता है, मगर extended family में बोलना काफी मुश्किल हो जाता है. और जितना हो सके हम लोग डिनाई करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि बच्चे को ऑटिज्म है, एंड जितना हो काफी हद तक हम लोग, मैंने देखा भी है कि we try to almost hide our children, और उनको हम लोग expose करने की कोशिश, we just try not to expose them as much as practicable.
I know, because these days we find that how your child is doing, बच्चे का जो performance है, बच्चे को आप कौन से स्कूल भेज रहे हो, बच्चा कितने नंबर ला रहा है, बच्चे कितने एक्स्ट्रा करिकुलर एक्टिविटीज में पार्टिसिपेट कर रहा है, ये सारे these have become markers of the parent status. कि मैं जितने भी फेमस स्कूल में बच्चे को भेज रहा हूँ, उस दैट शोज माई फैमिली स्टेटस. जितना मेरा बच्चा हाई अचीवर है, दैट रिफ्लेक्ट्स ऑन माई स्टेटस. सो वी आर बिकमिंग व्हाट वी कॉल्ड अ चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक सोसाइटी. पहले ये था कि बच्चे परिवार का हिस्सा थे, लेकिन उन्हीं के इर्द गिर्द पूरा परिवार नहीं घूमता था. हम देखते थे कि बच्चे जरूर हमेशा उनकी अहमियत होती थी, लेकिन आज की तारीख में हम देखते हैं कि बच्चों के लिए पेरेंट्स कुछ भी करने को तैयार है. हम देखते हैं कि वो किसी भी एक्सट्रीम तक जाने के लिए तैयार है. हाल फिलहाल में इन दिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट आई वुड लाइक टू रेज अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट. आपको याद होगा, मीडिया में कुछ महीनों पहले एक केस बहुत लाइमलाइट में आया कि एक एक्सपेक्टेंट मदर, जिसे पता चल गया था कि उसके पेट में जो बच्चा पल रहा है उसको किसी तरह की एक डिफॉर्मिटी या किसी तरह की एक डिसेबिलिटी थी, और वो उसे लीगली अबॉर्ट करना चाहती थी, प्रेगनेंसी को खत्म करना चाहती थी. लेकिन जो एक लीगल लिमिट, सर्टेन नंबर ऑफ वीक्स जो होता है जिसके तहत आप अबॉर्शन लीगली कर सकते हो, वो टाइम पीरियड एक्सपायर हो चुका था. तो शी वाज सीकिंग स्पेशल परमिशन फ्रॉम द कोर्ट. और उस वक्त जो टू एंड फ्रो जो आर्ग्यूमेंट्स थे, आई मीन, डज अ चाइल्ड विद अ डिसेबिलिटी हैव द राइट टू लिव? This was a very, very interesting public debate, and as a sociologist, I followed the debate with a great deal of interest, because it really gave a very good indicator into the way, our values have changed or not changed, what we think about disability. Once again, the issue that I had raised of, failed or incomplete personhood. एक इंसान जो शरीर या मन से बिल्कुल नॉर्मल नहीं है या नॉर्मेटिव नहीं है, वो एक तरह से हमारे जहन में वो इंसान ही नहीं है. जो व्यक्ति बोल नहीं सकता, सुन नहीं सकता, अलग तरीके से समझता है, जिसकी बुद्धि मेरी बुद्धि जितनी बराबर नहीं है, वो देयरफॉर एक इंसान ही नहीं है, उसके अधिकार नहीं है, उसका एक अस्तित्व नहीं. एग्जैक्टली, उसको न जीने का अधिकार है, न एक उसे एक समाज का एक इम्पोर्टेंट सदस्य, एक कंट्रीब्यूटिंग मेंबर समझना तो दूर ही, लेकिन क्या उसे जीने का ही अधिकार है? इस विषय पे जो एक काफी मतलब हीटेड डिबेट उस समय चला था, दैट वाज वेरी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. इंद्रानी, योर व्यूज ऑन दिस would be
basically taking off from what you said is that if you are not normal, then you are not a person. I remember the debate, and वहाँ से एक और एक चीज जो निकल रही थी was that किसी भी व्यक्ति के अंदर अगर कोई भी डिफरेंस हो, हम उस डिफरेंस से बहुत डरते हैं, और वो डिफरेंस को हम जितना हो सके
नकारते हैं या उसको मिटाने की कोशिश करते
एग्जैक्टली. सो आइदर यू फॉल विद इन द स्पेक्ट्रम, एक आप नॉर्मल इंसान हो, जो नॉर्मल नहीं है उसको इस दुनिया में रहने की कोई हक नहीं है, बिकॉज दैट पर्सन डजंट डिजर्व टू एग्जिस्ट.
Of course, to be fair to the argument, to look at the argument from both sides, one of the very important points that was raised was care. Is society providing the family of that child who is going to be born with a lifelong problem enough facilities? Or is it that the parents are going to be spending the whole life paying exorbitant hospital fees, medical bills, whatever, just to bring up this child? So इसमें दो मुद्दे हैं. एक, क्या हम इन लोगों को जो हमसे विपरीत हो या डिफरेंट हो, हमसे अलग हो, क्या हम उनको एक इंसान के रूप में मानते हैं? और दूसरी बात, क्या हम इनके प्रति जो अपना जिम्मा है वो उठाने में सक्षम है कि नहीं? ये दोनों एस्पेक्ट्स इस डिबेट के, really, these are the key points on the debate, which is still ongoing and which really, there is no solution or there is no easy or pat or quick answer to this. This is something which activists, parents, disabled people themselves all need to debate, and society needs to take these issues up very, very seriously indeed.
Right. So next thing.
Yeah, let's move on now to some of the important aspects of how support is to be rendered. We've spoken so far at great length on the various problems that families face. Now let's talk about support, and we begin as a first, sort of point with the role of the medical community. And once again, we emphasize the importance of early diagnosis and early intervention, preparing and counseling parents sensitively. Medical community is also the gatekeeper to further assessment and referrals, and they play a very key role in determining how the family as a whole will cope in future.
Right.
A diagnosis which is delivered sensitively, telling the parents that, look, this is a difficulty, your child has got these symptoms, and this is what your child, has this problem or this condition, and this is what you can do. If this is done sensitively, it prepares the parents, or it sows the seeds of acceptance in the parents right at the very source. But if a doctor, and frequently we find, अरे ये तो बच्चा आपका बिल्कुल खत्म ही केस है, इसका तो कुछ नहीं हो सकता, भूल जाओ, दूसरा बच्चा फटाफट करो. This is something जो हमने कई बार सुना है कि डॉक्टर शुरू में ही कहता कि बस जी आप भूल जाओ, इसको ना स्कूल में भर्ती करने की जरूरत है ना कुछ भी, ये तो बच्चा आपका गया, ये तो मतलब अब हो गया, उसको किसी तरह निभाओ और फटाफट दूसरा बच्चा पैदा करो और अपनी go get on with your lives. You find that this in itself is something so ironic, that the person who is supposed to really give you the maximum sensible advice, and that is your doctor, is just completely disposing you to regard your child as a burden and somebody जिसको हमें झेलना है, जिसको हमें ढोना है जिंदगी भर, और न कि एक इंसान की चलो इसमें एक समस्या है, लेकिन उस समस्या के साथ हम कैसे चलेंगे, उस बच्चे को कैसे आगे बढ़ाएंगे. और जो हमने मुद्दा लिया, gatekeepers to further assessments and referrals, medical practitioners need to be aware of where to send the child. It's very important, and for this they need to have basic awareness and an appreciation of what the symptoms of various disabling conditions are, including autism.
Right.
Indrani, any
Well,
further comments to
as
that?
far as again, what happens invariably is that doctors, as she said, they could almost make or break the acceptance
Exactly.
bit. If they give you the solution along with the diagnosis, as in they tell you that okay fine, your child has autism, but आप ये कर सकते हैं बच्चे के साथ, वहीं से I think the parents come out with hope.
Right.
On the other hand, if the doctor, which, and there are two sides of the story, the doctor tells you that आपका बच्चे को autism है और आप कुछ नहीं कर सकते हो, so एक तो पहली बात है फैमिली को तब it's a loss of a dream. हम गए थे एक नॉर्मल बच्चे के साथ, हम निकल आ रहे हैं विद अ चाइल्ड जिसको लाइफ लॉन्ग डिसेबिलिटी है, और आप उसके ऊपर बोल रहे हो कि नॉट ओनली ये लाइफ लॉन्ग डिसेबिलिटी है, इसका कोई there's nothing to do. So ये जो इम्पैक्ट होती है, एंड we trust our doctors, वो जो बोलते हैं ऑलमोस्ट एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम लगता है भगवान बोल रहे हैं.
बोल रहे हैं, बिल्कुल.
तो वो अगर जरा सा सेंसिटिवली हैंडल कर सके जो कुछ डॉक्टर्स करते हैं, एंड बिकॉज ऑफ दैट सम पेरेंट्स कैन एक्सेप्ट इट राइट फ्रॉम डे वन, आई थिंक दैट वुड रियली हेल्प द एंटायर कम्युनिटी.
So there is an ardent need for training doctors to spot disabilities, and in this context, we may just cite the orientation program of primary health care personnel by the Rehabilitation Council of India. They launched a program in 1999, which was training, the medical community to identify children with disabling conditions, early intervention and rehabilitation, and prevention of disabling conditions. So once again, to reiterate a bit about the medical community, you find that this is really the first person, this is the first specialist a child sees. A child with autism, the first specialist that he or she is likely to see is the pediatrician. So therefore, the role of the pediatrician, the role of the general physician is a very, very key role, and they need to be trained and sensitized in spotting disabling conditions right from the word go.
Right.
Okay?
But what about the rural conditions?
That's a very important point. You find that in rural areas, where healthcare facilities are at a bare minimum, you find that other, schemes like the ICDS, you find that the Anganwadi scheme,
Right.
within those, schemes which are being launched by the government for rural children, here also trained personnel, importance of disseminating information, awareness. Every family can't take his or her child to a specialist to get a diagnosis.
Right.
But at-risk children, how at-risk children are to be identified, this can be imparted by a very intensive countrywide program to sensitize primary healthcare workers, Anganwadi personnel, and other people who are working with children at a very, very basic and primary level.
Okay.
Right? So this is very, very important.
So there is some screening checklist with the Anganwadi worker follows?
Well, not that I am aware of, not as yet. And a screening checklist is in fact being developed. A tool is being developed, an indigenous tool. At the moment, the autism diagnosis tools that are available with us are borrowed from the West.
Okay.
Okay, so and it is accepted that in every in every cultural context, the variables, the cultural variables play a very, very important role in determining how the disorder manifests itself.
Right.
So there is a screening tool, I believe, has been developed. It has yet to be notified. Okay, so I believe it is still with the law ministry, which it has to be officially notified in order for it to become, an accepted countrywide acceptable screening instrument, which is really the benchmark. Let's move on to the role of teachers and caregivers, which is also equally vital. Now, we say that the access to education is vital for the welfare of persons with disability. This is a basic bedrock on which all our rehabilitation efforts are geared. Teachers must have an awareness of the special abilities of their children and their special needs. They must help support children to adjust to new environments, and this is the most critical, find them appropriate placements. They must help to change attitudes of the teachers, convince them that ASD children can and should be educated. They have to help in putting in place a comprehensive teaching program, training teachers and schools to integrate children with ASD. They must also work as advocates for the child and the family, and importantly, sensitize other children. Now, this is a really very long and detailed wish list, and it is really not. Once again, unrealistic expectations. How do you expect a teacher or a caregiver to do so much? But they have to make a start. One of the most important things we find is that schools simply do not accept that the child with autism can learn, should learn, and that they have a duty to teach the child.
Exactly.
I think we have Indrani here who would like to probably share her own experiences. How was it when you tried to get a schooling for your child?
When I tried to get schooling for Nana when he was young, I of course came from the belief that my child would not go to a special school.
Okay.
Because he was smart and he would want to. He should have gone to a mainstream school, and I did put him into a mainstream school, and he was there for around 7 years. And what happened there was that though he went to the mainstream, he was put in a separate room with a teacher who tried her best to teach him something, but she really did not have the knowledge about autism or about how to deal with autism to be able to help him in any way. So technically he was going to school, and what we saw was he was just staying there, and those 3 or 4 hours could have been put to good use elsewhere. If we could train our teachers, and it is an incredible burden on, and I will use the word burden on, to expect a regular classroom teacher to do everything without support. But there are NGOs which would be willing to support
Absolutely.
efforts mainstream
yeah.
school teachers.
In this
If-
context, you know, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan also has, come forth with very innovative and very important schemes about integrating children. You know, the belief is that all children of school must receive elementary education, irrespective of their ability or disability, and that it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that every child gets an education. And so, to this extent, you know, special training of teachers on how to deal with the students with special needs and so on. All these are ongoing efforts. Since I'm not an expert on education, I would not want to delve into much detail in this. I'm sure you'll have other experts talking in detail about educational schemes and what needs to be done in the classroom. I think a very, very important thing that needs to be reiterated at this point is that people with autism have got different learning styles. It's very important to acknowledge that. You cannot expect, if I expect that my child with or the child with autism in my class is going to conform and behave exactly the way that other children in the classroom are behaving, then my efforts at integration are, you know, doomed right from day one. And also in this context, I would like to bring up this whole debate about inclusion. Inclusion these days is a very fashionable word. Everyone talks inclusion. We must do inclusion. We must, have integrated setups. The idea is extremely noble, and if in the true sense, in letter and spirit, inclusion were carried out in our classrooms, nothing could be more wonderful. But very often we find that inclusion is, the spirit of inclusion, which is acceptance of all kinds of difficulties. In our school system, we find very often we are segregating regular children on the basis of this is the class for the bright ones and this is the class for the duffers.
Yeah.
So, in such a setting, how can you even talk about inclusion? So, I think these are once again very, very serious issues of ideas, serious issues of our ideologies really regarding education and pedagogy that need to be dealt with at a very, very fundamental level.
Right. So far we discussed about the impact on the grandparents, apart from discussing the impact on the mother, father as well as a sibling. Then we talked about the changing family status, that is from a joint family to a nuclear family because of the industrialization or the urbanization. The joint family is breaking down into into nuclear families because parents are migrating to a more metropolitan cities for a better education, for the better medical care. Then we discussed about the disability and the stigma. Usually in the past, it has been thought that disability is because of the theory of the karma, because of your past deeds, the child is born disabled. Plus there are some if the parents are having a child with autism, then they are able to tell this to their friends, to their social circle groups, but they are hiding this fact from their extended families. So we discussed about the impact on the grandparents, the changing status of the family, the disability and the stigma. Plus we talked about the role of the early identification, early intervention, which is very important. Plus the rehabilitative and intervention measures and the proper counseling and the support groups. Plus the role of the teachers to some extent in handling the child with autism spectrum disorder and handling the child with autism. They can be very educated and they can be having awareness about the disorder. Plus the concept of the integration as well as the inclusion to be properly followed. So we'll carry on with our discussion after a short break. See you after a short break.
कोई मुश्किल हो दूर मंजिल हो never stops us from dreaming हारता है वो हार माने जो we are what we believe in हम धरती को अंबर से मिला दे हम उड़ सकते हैं उड़कर दिखा दे हम छू ले सितारों को We can touch the sky आशा के पंखों पे We can and we will fly We can and we will fly
Our vision at the Rehabilitation Council of India is to enhance the standard and quality of special education and rehabilitation services for the betterment of persons with disability in the country. Our mission is to regulate training policies and programs, standardize and develop training courses, recognize institutions and courses, promote research, maintain the Central Rehabilitation Register, collect and disseminate information to provide and improve the quality of special education. Our dream is to build a free environment for persons with disabilities by an enlightened special education system and to reinforce the education system by social engineering. The dream is total rehabilitation of persons with disabilities.
Welcome back. We talked about the impact on the mother, the father, the siblings, as well as on the grandparents. Plus, we talked about the change of the family's existence and the disability and the stigma attached to it. We talked about the possible role of the teachers in dealing with the children with autism spectrum disorders. Plus, we talked about the role of the early intervention, rehabilitative measures and intervention measures. So let's ask, as we talked about these intervention measures and these counseling, what probably the suitable measures that we can follow or a family can follow?
I think before we go on, I think it's very important also to talk about family therapy and counseling. When we've just spoken about the role of the educational community in helping to find a child suitable placements, create an environment wherein the child can be properly educated. An equally important aspect is family therapy and counseling, which includes fostering positive coping, information, giving success stories to empower families, encouraging self-development activities, especially for mothers, addressing the needs of siblings, grandparents and other family members, and preparing for the future. Let's elaborate this a little bit. We've constantly stressed the difficulties involved in having a child with autism, but one of the very important things that any counselor or any family therapist or anybody who is working with children with disability in their families needs to do is also foster positive coping. बच्चा ऑटिस्टिक बाद में है, लेकिन पहले वो आपका बच्चा है और उस बच्चे से जो आपको आनंद मिल सकता है, उस बच्चे की परवरिश में जो एक सेटिस्फैक्शन होता है, उस बच्चे के छोटे छोटे माइलस्टोन्स में आपको जो खुशी होती है, हो सकता है वो बच्चा आईआईटी का एग्जाम क्रैक नहीं करेगा, लेकिन जिस दिन मेरा बच्चा सफलतापूर्वक एक दुकान में जाके अपने लिए कोई चीज खरीद लेगा, उस चीज में भी बहुत ज्यादा सेटिस्फैक्शन एक पेरेंट को मिल सकता है. और इन चीजों को एंजॉय करना, इन चीजों का एक सेटिस्फैक्शन लेना और अपने बच्चे के साथ एक रैपोर्ट बनाना, एक रिलेशनशिप सस्टेन करना, ये भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीजें हैं. हम देखते हैं कि जब हम परिवारों के साथ बात करते हैं, we may talk about the difficulties families are facing, but when you actually talk to families, you will be amazed at the amount of unconditional acceptance many of them have for their children. और इसका कोई ताल्लुक wealth या education या किसी चीज से नहीं होता है. मैं कई बार देख चुकी हूँ कि बहुत ही humble background में जो लोग रह रहे हैं, बहुत ही निम्न resources वाले हैं, जो बहुत हाई फाई नहीं है जिसे हम कहते हैं, या बहुत मतलब अच्छे सर्विसेज में नहीं है, लेकिन फिर भी उनके अपने बच्चों के प्रति इतनी अधिक फीलिंग होती है, इतनी अधिक ममता होती है कि वो देख के कभी कभी हम सो कॉल्ड पढ़े लिखे लोग भी शर्मिंदा फील करते हैं कि इतनी ज्यादा अनकंडीशनल एक्सेप्टेंस इन लोगों में है. तो मतलब there is hope that children are going to be very well looked after, very much loved, very deeply loved by their families. So this attitude of positive coping, of accepting the child, this is a very, very important goal of any family therapy. Also, like I said, giving success stories. There are a number of stories. It's not just that having a child with disability is something so terrible कि आपकी ज़िंदगी बस खत्म हो गई. कई परिवार है जो बहुत बढ़िया से कोप करते हैं, बहुत अच्छी तरह से बच्चा डेवलप कर रहा है. वो सक्सेस स्टोरीज देख के हौसला अफजाई एक परिवार का करना, ये भी एक फैमिली थेरेपिस्ट के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट जिम्मेदारी है. And like we have mentioned earlier, addressing the needs or addressing the issues of all the family members, whether it is the mother, the father, the siblings, the grandparents, each of them, as we have seen, has got different sets of issues in the context of living with a child with autism. And preparing for the future. This is something which is, cannot be underemphasized, because very often we are so focused on dealing with the here and now of the child कि हम भूल जाते हैं कि एक दिन ये बच्चा बड़ा हो जाएगा, ये एक adult बनेगा, इस बच्चे को एक adult बन के रहना है. क्योंकि autism में you find that individuals with autism have a normal lifespan. So they are going to live, and in most cases they are going to outlive their parents. Okay, so it is very important for parents to plan ahead कि आगे जाके हम इस बच्चे को आत्मनिर्भर कैसे बनेंगे. अब आत्मनिर्भर के सेंस में भी हम ये नहीं कह रहे कि आप उसको डॉक्टर बनाओगे, इंजीनियर बनाओगे, वो भी बन सकते हैं, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. लेकिन जो बेसिक सेल्फ केयर फंक्शंस होते हैं, वो क्या अपनी रक्षा करेगा, अपनी मतलब सेल्फ केयर नीड्स का ये कर सकेगा, सेटिस्फाई कर सकेगा. कैन ही कुक फॉर हिमसेल्फ, कैन ही शॉप फॉर हिमसेल्फ, कैन ही लुक आफ्टर हिमसेल्फ, कैन ही मेंटेन हिज हाउस. And also other issues like sexual issues, issues of companionship, which in itself would constitute, I think, a whole 2-hour program. So I don't think we shall go into that right now. So family therapy and counseling is a very, very important component of dealing with families and helping them to accept the child and learn to go ahead with the child.
Very well said. So family therapy and counseling, basically it's a need to provide the parents with their success stories, the developmental activities, and basically preparing the child for the future. It's not that your child should crack the IIT exam, as Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya said. You can have a simple satisfaction in simple activities where your child is going to shop to buy something, or whether he's able to cook for himself, he's able to bathe, and he's able to carry on the daily living activities. You can have a simple satisfaction that also, because the main sole purpose is to make that child independent. Because as ma'am said, that autistic children, they have a normal lifespan, and they can outlive their parents. So they have to lead a normal independent life of their own, carrying on their daily activities independently. So the parents can, apart from having a pressure of bearing a child with autism, they can have a simple plain satisfaction in seeing their child performing the daily living activities independently. So progressing further,
let's move on to some important other support mechanisms that we can talk about. Respite care and other alternatives. Now, respite care recently has become the subject of much discussion, giving the regular caregiver, in this case usually the mother or any other family member, a break from the constant caregiving activities that he or she is performing. Foster care, when families cannot care for the child. And the concept of group homes or assisted livings. Now, we may emphasize that these are actually Western models that can be carefully adapted to Indian needs. Basically, when we talk about what for the future, it's very important to realize that in a future where the parents may not be available to be with the child on a day-to-day basis, you have to have other alternatives in place. And group homes or assisted livings, as they exist in the West, the whole concept of group of families coming together, making living arrangements for the children, so that even should any of the parents pass away, you find that there are other families who will still be there to keep a watchful eye on the child. So this is a very important kind of alternative living model which is in place in the West, and we have to think about it now in the Indian context as well. It's very important. And the earlier point that I had mentioned, respite care. Now, the training programs that that those out there listening to this program are taking up. Basically, you are learning how to deal with the educational and rehabilitative issues of children with autism spectrum disorder and other difficulties also. An important aspect that you need to focus on is how to support families by providing respite care. Because there are limits to the patience, there are limits to the stamina of the regular caregiver. And by ensuring certain kinds of programs or certain kinds of personnel who can actually provide care for the child, when the mother has just gone out shopping, or the mother has just gone out for a break with her friends, or any activity which is going to release the tension on the primary caregiver, so that he or she can come back and do a better job with enthusiasm, sustain their energy, sustain their enthusiasm. Respite care is a very, very important aspect, and training of caregivers who can give respite care is a very important aspect, I feel, of supporting families. And the issue of foster care. Now, in the West, we find that parents who are not in a position or don't want to look after their children with disabilities often surrender the child to foster parents, and this whole scheme is administered by, through a welfare agency or through the state, wherein foster parents willingly take in the child, look after the children, and they are paid a certain stipend. Now, this is something that, in the light of the fact that so many parents in the Indian context are so poor and so ill-serviced, so far away from, have no access to facilities, this could provide a very, very, a viable alternative for parents whereby they can give up their children for fostering, and you would have foster parents who actually receive a remuneration to do so. But at the same time, I may add, this has to be administered with a great deal of care, because this should not be an excuse for, rackets in children. This should not be an excuse for parents to just, abandon their children. But we find that in the absence of such a system also, parents who don't want to look after their children just leave the child, just abandon the child. You have literally lakhs of abandoned children begging by the roadside, abandoned at railway stations, children abandoned at hospitals. This is a very, very terrible sort of human rights issue, which needs to be taken up by the state and by society and by anyone with a conscience, because abandoning babies is something which we just live with this fact. And it is something that must be dealt with right from the source.
As you have mentioned these three models, the respite care, foster care and the group homes. Which kind of these three models are being followed in India?
Well, in India, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think any of these models are followed as a matter of policy. We find that in India, it's good that you raised this question, that much of the care with regard to people with disabilities, particularly autism, is usually done by non-governmental organizations. Although in this context, it's very important to mention the very, very important work done by the National Trust for the Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation and Multiple Disabilities. And we'll come to it in a minute. And I've also just today itself, listed down some of the innovative schemes that the National Trust is offering. In fact, if I can just share with you, I just saw on their website today that the National Trust is planning a scheme for group homes, for encouraging NGOs to start group homes. And it is called Gharonda. Yeah, this is it. Gharonda, which is a new scheme for providing lifelong shelter in group homes, which the National Trust is taking up. But more details about this, I suppose, can be available by the National Trust itself. Right?
Right.
Let's move on to another equally important issue. That this is basically an adulthood issue. We've discussed that children with autism grow up into adults with autism. And here we are going to speak about vocational issues. The need for the person with autism spectrum disorder to become a fully contributing member of society. The importance to impart pre-vocational skills, life skills, and functional literacy. Sheltered workshops, supported or competitive work environments, and involving industry and the service sector. Now, in this context, what I would like to say is that autism, as we've discussed, is a spectrum disorder. There are many children on the autism spectrum who are islands of great ability. Okay, you find that many of them have islands of tremendous ability in maths, in computer sciences, and these abilities are in many ways, far superior to their other abilities. So socially, a child may be very backward, but in terms of, maybe his mathematical ability or her painting ability or, other kinds of islands of ability, as we call them, they may be extremely, they may in fact overperform. Very often we find that in children, parents of children with high functioning autism, which is a kind of a subtype of autism, parents of children with high functioning autism believe that their children really do not need the kinds of remedial teaching, or they do not really need to develop the kinds of functional and life skills training that other so-called low functioning children may be receiving. Right. So very often you find that parents in fact insist, my child is so capable, my child is so intelligent, why can he or she not be taught advanced mathematics? Why can't he or she only be, why can't we only focus on these, skill areas? Of course, at this juncture, it's very important to note that while it is wonderful if your child can do advanced mathematics, what use is doing advanced mathematics if he or she can't go to the shop and buy a loaf of bread?
Right.
So these are very, very critical issues in developing life skills, developing work skills. And developing work skills is something that any educational program can initiate at a very early age. How to develop those basic skills that are going to be of use to the child in the workplace. Because most children with autism are usually not going to be, doing advanced physics, or not going to be doing their PhD, or not going to be, doing advanced mathematics. They're usually like the general population. There are some people who may have exceptional skills, and the majority of people don't have exceptional skills. And the same is absolutely the case with autism as well. Now, the majority of children with autism need to have those skills put in place, which are going to enable them to negotiate with life on a day-to-day basis, and which are going to enable them to take up employment in the future. Now, the employment options, we find that they can be working in a sheltered workshop, or workshops which are exclusively for children or persons with disability, where they work under a good deal of supervision, where their special needs are taken into account, and where they are paid a stipend for the goods that they produce or the work that they do. Or it could be situations of competitive environments where they actually compete with others to get jobs or to enter the workforce. And once again, I'd like to emphasize that people with autism, it is found in the workplace, tend to be very methodical, very rule-abiding, very law-abiding workers, because they are great fans of rhythm, they are, and of routine. For them, their routine is absolutely sacrosanct. And so therefore, a worker who at the workplace is going to, very, very scrupulously adhere to routine, that person is a great asset in an organization. You won't have out-of-turn coffee breaks and other kinds of, slacking off at the office that you very often see with so-called normal people. So very often you find that autistic employees tend to be an asset, not a liability. And involving industry and the service sector is of great importance. We find that just like you have audits, of financial audits, you also need to have in place social audits. You also need to know what is it that industry is contributing to the social sector. What is it contributing back to the society from which it is gaining so much. So most, modern industries also have a very strong social agenda, and it is these social agendas which need to be explored. People need to sit down, discuss in detail, find out exactly how it is that people with autism can contribute to the functioning of various industries or service sectors and so on. In this connection, there's a very interesting piece of information I'd like to share. There is a parent from Finland, I believe, Thorkel Sone, his name is, and he is the parent of a child of a grown-up man now who's got autism, and he has started an IT company, Specialistern, which only employs persons from the autism spectrum. He is an IT specialist himself, but due to his son's difficulty and finding some kind of employment for his son, he started a company which is actually doing IT enabled various activities. I don't know exactly the details about what is it that they do, but he has only autistic employees, and it is found that there are certain companies which are very eager to give them work because they know that timelines are always met. These people usually adhere to timelines and work is done as per schedule. So this was a very interesting initiative started by a parent of a child with autism or a person with autism.
But as you discussed about the pre-vocational skills, so how can we guide a parent in identifying what suitable vocation is applicable for the child? How can we have that?
That's a very interesting question. You find that children may show interests in various kinds of skill areas, and it is up to the parents and the educators to devise an IEP or an individualized educational plan which takes into account the child's skills, the child's interest, and also with a view to how these skills can be utilized in the future. Like I mentioned to you, I'm not an expert in special education, so this is something that would be best addressed by an education expert as to exactly how children are to be, how education is to be imparted in order to enable a child to excel or to do his or her best in whatever area he or she chooses. Now, this is really a very important thing that I would like to talk about in terms of providing support to families of children with autism, and that is the role of community-based rehabilitation, or CBR. CBR philosophy basically is rooted in the fact that disability is not just a medical issue, it is also a developmental issue. Rehabilitation in CBR, or in community-based rehabilitation, is carried out within the community, involving all the stakeholders. It includes inclusion, advocacy, information, and awareness. CBR attempts to ensure that access to resources is obtained by those who need them, and also it encourages the growth of self-help groups and community-based organizations. What are the advantages of CBR in the context of providing support to families with autistic children? Firstly, through CBR initiatives, we can help spread autism awareness in the community. We can help to facilitate early detection and intervention. And this is very important. Through CBR, there can be linkages with government programs like the ICDS. It can lead to awareness and therefore inclusion in schools which have so far refused to admit children with autism. CBR, since it works within family settings a great deal, can also strengthen families and help them to work with the child. And this is very important, it can help to reduce social isolation of the family, and through self-help groups enable families to get involved in the day-to-day activities of their child and in fostering acceptance of their child.
As we have said, like, would you like to explain these points?
No, is that there's any thing you'd like to ask me about these points? Please go ahead.
As we discussed about the integrated education and the inclusion thing, do you have any schools in like Delhi or in India which like admitting the children with autism?
Definitely, there are several schools which are admitting children with autism.
The mainstream schools.
Mainstream schools. There are mainstream schools which have got special wings. There are mainstream schools in which children with autism are admitted as part of the mainstream classroom. And there are also mainstream schools which also come with special schools. You know, they have a mainstream school and they have a special school attached to them. No doubt these schools are very much there, but once again we find that in the case of children with autism, children who are on the upper end of the spectrum or the more able end of the spectrum usually tend to get school placements.
Okay.
Children who have more serious difficulties are usually considered unteachable, or schools don't want to take them. Also, children who may have certain very difficult behaviors, usually they are not welcomed into either inclusive or even in many cases special school settings. You would be amazed to know that many children with severe symptoms don't even get admitted into special schools, because there are just a handful of autism specific special schools in the whole of the country. I don't think there are more than 50 to 60 autism exclusive schools in India as such. And within mixed disabilities special schools, children who have got very, very difficult symptoms or who have autism and difficult behaviors are rarely welcome. I mean, very often they are just rejected straight away. Whenever the autism diagnosis is seen, they're straight away sent off, because educators don't have the expertise to deal with autism. And also the great deal of misconception about the fact that people with autism are unteachable. People with autism are violent. These are very, very typical responses that you encounter when you talk about people with autism. People with autism are hyperactive. अरे ये बच्चा तो बैठेगा नहीं, ये तो भाग जाएगा, इसको हम क्या सिखाएंगे? This is something we often get to hear. ये बच्चा तो बहुत दूसरे बच्चों को मारेगा, ये तो पिंच करेगा, ये तो ये करेगा, वो करेगा, हम इसको नहीं रख सकते हैं क्योंकि ये पूरे क्लासरूम को डिसरप्ट करेगा. So there is a lot of misconception or a lot of prejudice about the disruptive or the negative kind of aspects of autism, and therefore ये बच्चे तो कुछ सीख नहीं सकते, ये कुछ समझ नहीं सकते, and therefore हम इनको अपने स्कूल में लेके क्या करेंगे, बल्कि दूसरे बच्चे और खराब हो जाएंगे इनके साथ बैठ के. जो बच्चे अच्छा सीख रहे हैं वो भी उनकी आदतें सीखेंगे. These are the very, very standard kinds of understandings of autism, जो कि न सिर्फ हम रेगुलर स्कूल्स में देखते हैं, बट स्पेशल स्कूल्स में भी इस तरह की मानसिकता होती है.
So we have to guide the families to deal with the pressure and the burden.
Exactly, guide the families, and I'm glad you've raised this point, because you have to guide families to advocate for their child. ये अक्सर हम देखते हैं कि जो पेरेंट्स अपने बच्चे के लिए एक स्कूल में प्लेसमेंट ढूंढते हैं, उनको लिटरली उन स्कूल्स को कन्विंस करना पड़ता है, उन स्कूल्स को एजुकेट करना पड़ता है कि हमारा बच्चा क्या कर सकता है, आप हमारे बच्चे के लिए क्या कर सकते हैं, है ना. तो इट्स नॉट जस्ट दैट हमने स्कूल में बच्चे को भर्ती किया और बात खत्म हो गई, बस वो बच्चा पढ़ेगा और आवर प्रॉब्लम इज सॉल्व्ड. कई बार प्रॉब्लम स्कूल के एडमिशन के साथ ही शुरू होती है, क्योंकि हम देखते हैं कि स्कूल सेटिंग में भी यू नीड हाईली मोटिवेटेड, हाईली ट्रेन्ड एंड हाईली एम्पैथेटिक टीचर्स. अब वो कहाँ मिलेंगी अब?
Right.
So the emphasis on training teachers, which is why I'm so glad that there are teachers out there who are training to become special educators, and these are really going to be the committed vanguard of personnel who are going to help families and help children with autism to access the basic right that every child has, and that is to an appropriate education.
I think one more question has been left
Sure.
unanswered. Like we have discussed like pediatrician are the first persons to which the parents go
Right.
in having a diagnosis regarding an autistic child, but they often misdiagnose the child. So who are the right professionals, the personnels who deal with diagnosis aspect? Where should the parents
Well,
go?
actually, a clinical diagnosis can be given only by a trained pediatrician or a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Okay.
We also have departments of psychology, departments of psychiatry in hospitals which can give diagnosis. And also, we find increasingly that because autism is such a neglected area, you find that in many NGOs who are actually doing hardcore grassroots work with people with autism, they are very often in a better position to actually guide parents as to what the issues with the child are and how they can go ahead. But the important thing to stress here is that it is really the developmental pediatrician or even the general practitioner, the general physician who the child sees, who has to be sensitized to the need to spot the symptoms of autism. This fact cannot be overemphasized.
Okay. Shall we go ahead with the CPI?
Yeah, sure. And this is also one of the important aspects regarding giving support to families of children with autism, the role of civil society and state initiatives. And as we've been indicating throughout our discussion, there has been an immense growth of NGOs in the disability sector. We find that it is the NGO activism which resulted in autism being recognized as a disability in 1999. And the National Trust Act for the Welfare of Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation and Multiple Disabilities was promulgated in 1999, wherein for the first time autism was actually recognized as a disability in its own right. And family-led NGOs and various other disability organizations have been lobbying for a very, very long time for inclusion of autism in the Persons with Disability Act of 1995. Now, as our audience would probably know, the PWD Act of 1995 is the core benchmark legislation pertaining to disability in India. And autism, unfortunately, is not included in the PWD Act as yet. However, in 1999, the National Trust Act was promulgated, keeping in mind that persons with certain categories of disabilities have got certain special needs, which probably would not be addressed by the other disability legislations in place. And these needs basically refer to lifelong care, the issue of guardianship, what happens when the parents are gone. And we find that one of the important mandates of the National Trust Act is, it has evolved a mechanism for appointing legal guardians, and not just appointing legal guardians, but also monitoring the guardianship that is performed by these legal guardians. So not just has the National Trust evolved this mechanism, but it can also ensure that children or persons who are under guardianship are not neglected, they are getting what is due to them, they are being properly looked after. And also, guardians who are defaulting or guardians who are neglecting their wards or who are mistreating them can be divested of the guardianship of that person. So this is a very important legal safeguard that the National Trust has brought into place. The National Trust also has several innovative schemes that it has launched, including a very important one, that is Nirmay, the medical insurance scheme. Very often we find that persons with disabilities, their health becomes a very residual sort of concern. Nobody really bothers about their health. Nobody really bothers that they're getting a good quality of life. So therefore this health scheme, this insurance scheme, which enables them to avail of health facilities and health care up to rupees 1 lakh, is a very important scheme that has been launched by Nirmay. And I urge all parents of children with autism, whoever may be watching it, to enroll for this scheme, because it will also help to register your numbers with the government. People need to know how many people with autism there are out there. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan that I had mentioned earlier, this is also an extremely important flagship scheme of the Government of India. We'll not go into too much detail because this would, it could take up an entire program discussing what the SSA is doing. Also at this stage, and this is particularly for the audience out there, RCI approved training programs to prepare a cadre of committed and trained personnel. That's all of you out there, who are listening to us as we are on air right now, and a very, very important initiative, because unless you have trained personnel, how can, where are parents going to go, where are families going to go? Right? And partnerships between NGOs and government agencies, this is also very, very important. Like we've mentioned earlier, it's the lobbying of NGOs, or the lobbying of parent-driven NGOs that actually woke the government up to the fact that there is this disability called autism, and it needs to be recognized, it needs to be accounted for, it needs to be included as part of our national agenda.
Like as you have mentioned the National Trust Act, I would like to ask a question here. Like the NHFTC, which provide the loans for like the employment thing, does it also include autism?
I'm not sure about that. That is something you will need to check from either the National Trust or from the agency concerned. Okay. So there are other schemes of the National Trust that includes the Gyan Prabha, the Udyam Prabha. These are schemes to provide funding for higher education. We'd mentioned the scheme Gharonda, which is a new scheme for providing lifelong shelter and group homes. There's Sahyogi, which is a new and a revamped scheme of training caregivers and deployment of caregivers. And the whole concept of Samarth, which is a center-based scheme which was introduced in July 2005 for short-term and long-term residential services. And the activities in a Samarth center, to be recognized as a Samarth center, activities include intervention, special education, integration, schooling, open schooling, pre-vocational, vocational training, etc. So the National Trust has, in its short span of time, brought into play a number of very, very innovative and important schemes for the benefit of persons with disability. Another interesting thing I saw was Aspiration, which is an early intervention program to train children between the age groups of 0 to 6 years for school readiness. And all this is actually in tune really with, the commitment. We have to say this, that for a developing country, we have shown immense commitment at the level of policy and at the level of, our national goals towards the welfare of persons with disability. I mean, it's a matter of great pride that India was one of the first countries to ratify the UN Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disability in 2007. And this is something that every Indian can be justifiably very proud of. However, we see that the fit between actually policy planning and what the agendas, the welfare agendas of the government are, and actually they're percolating down to the grassroots. There is a big gap in that, and this is where committed NGOs in partnership with government agencies can really do a great deal. I'd like to sort of bring a wrap to our discussion today by really outlining what I think are some of the important things that we have to do, a way forward, what is to be our agenda for the future. I think working for an inclusive and plural society where all differences are valued and given their space, where human rights and entitlements of all citizens, irrespective of their abilities, are respected, while focusing rehabilitation efforts on the whole family, not just on the affected individual, and revitalizing our traditions of communitarian care and interdependence. I think there are many things to learn from the West, there are many things to learn about how disability has been handled, but there are many things that we can that we need to caution ourselves. You're familiar with the fact that for over a century, the way disabled people were dealt with in Western society was by incarcerating them, locking them up in institutions, taking them away from their families. And now we find that in the last 50 years or so, institutionalization as a strategy for dealing with people with disability is being reversed. Over there, they're waking up to the fact that it is actually within community settings, within the family, that a person with disabilities can really benefit and lead a full and rich life. And so institutionalization is being reversed. But in societies like India, you've always had a tradition of family care. The old, the sick, the destitute have always been sheltered or nurtured by a family system. And we find that today we are at a curious flux in the history of our society where the very systems which gave a great deal of security and nurture to individuals who are weak, who are sick, who are old, these very systems are now, coming, modernization and change is eroding these systems, and at the same time, no alternatives really have emerged in a very strong way to deal with them. So this is really, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that, modernization is bad, industrialization is terrible. Please remember that it is these very processes that have, in fact, increased our knowledge about disability, increased our appreciation about, issues, that disability entails. What I'm arguing is that we need, while respecting the differences of individuals, while respecting the knowledge that the West has to offer us, at the same time, our own traditions of caring for those who are weak, they must also be strengthened. They must not be lost sight of. Increasingly, we find individualism, I am the most important person, everyone else comes after me. My goals, my ambitions, my projects, these are more important than anything else. This kind of me orientation, this kind of extremely self-centered kind of achievement orientation, this needs to be tempered with a concern for those who are weaker than me, those who need my help, those who need my support. And support, remember, is never a one-sided thing. Right. I may think that today it is a person with disability who needs my support. Remember, tomorrow I will be old. I will have various kinds of disabilities myself, because aging and the aging body, you're not going to remain young, and you're not going to remain active forever, right? Illness, decline, disability, deterioration, these are life situations which all of us are facing, and therefore the interdependence of all human beings is really something that we're looking at. It's not that I'm strong, so therefore I'm going to give charity to the weak. It's that a person who may be weak also has the capacity to support me in various ways, and that is what we have to look at.
Very well said. So the crux of today's discussion, let me discuss over that. Basically, what is autism? It's a neurodevelopmental disorder pertaining to the problems in language, communication and social skill areas, with the odd behaviors as well as the sensory issues. We said it is a autism spectrum disorder. Why we say it is a spectrum? Because there's a variability of symptoms. That's why it is termed or coined as autism spectrum disorder. Usually the ASD or the autism spectrum disorder is often misdiagnosed, or it is left undiagnosed because of the lack of the information and awareness among the professionals, among the teachers and among the parents or among the family members. And if we talk on the impact onto the family members, which is our today's discussion topic, then we can say the mother, she is the primary caregiver. She has to play the multiple roles of that of a caretaker or a playmate, and there are overwhelming responsibilities, and she's very burdened with the responsibilities she has to perform for the child, or she has to perform for the family. And because of that, apart from that, the maternal blame from the family, from the extended family, goes on her, that because of you the child is born autistic, and because of you the child is having this kind of condition, the autism. And if we talk about the father, the impact on the father, then we can say usually he has to earn the bread and butter for the family. So usually because of this, there is loss of connectivity between him and the child, or between him and his wife. And if we talk about the siblings, then we can say they have to play the role of the surrogate parents. And especially that in the case of a male child, if a normal male child is there and having an autistic sibling, then all the pressure goes on him, that after the parents, he has to take care of his autistic child. And there are overburdened conditions on him or her. So we can say that there is loss of peer groups, so there are not enough peer groups or the counselor groups for the siblings. And if we talk on the impact on the grandparents, then they can be on the two sides of the spectrum. Either they are very supportive, not just the extended families or the in-laws, but the parents from the maternal side, the parents of the mother, they can be very supportive. Or we can say if the extended family members, then there is a generation gap there, and usually the maternal blame or the blame thing goes on to the mother. So if the parents are very supportive, or the extended family is very supportive, that will have a very fruitful result in bearing the child having an autism spectrum disorder. And if we talk that there is a change in the existence of the family structure because of the modernization, because of the industrialization, the parents having the autistic children, they are usually moving to metropolitan cities in search of a better educational aspect and in search of a better medical aspect. So usually the joint family structure is then broken down into the nuclear family structure, and the burden which is being initially divided among the different family members, whole soul comes onto the parents, or either onto the mother or to the father, we can say that. And if we talk about the disability and the stigma, then we can say Usually, it has been thought that disability is due to the theory of the karmas, because of your past deeds, the child is being born the disabled. And today, the parents, they're usually very comfortable in talking their child's disability with the social groups or with their friends, but not with them, with their extended families. And the role of the teachers has to play a very good part in this. We have to sensitize the teachers, and we have to make them aware about the integrated aspects and the inclusive aspects. Plus, we can follow the CBR approach, the success stories, the developmental activities, and preparing the child for the future. Apart from having the different schemes from the National Trust Act, which ma'am has discussed, and the role of NGOs also play a very important part. So that's all for today's session. But before that, I would like to thank Dr. Shubhangi Vedda
Thank you.
for coming over here and discussing
Thank
with
you.
this topic. And thank you viewers for maintaining with us. Thank you so much.